So welcome to the workshop, which is Authentic Assessment, Designing Authentic Assessment, which was created by my coworker, Maria, and we are co-facilitating. So we're going to go ahead and introduce ourselves. So I'll start with myself. I'm Devshikha Bose, and I work as an instructional design consultant with the Idea Shop.
I'm Ficks. I'm the manager of the testing center.
Maria Shimel, I'm an instructional technologist with Blackboard Support Learning Technology Solutions. I used to be a co-manager of the testing center, so really in here.
And I'm Casper, and I'm also an instructional designer over at the Idea Shop. And just so y'all know, we're recording. So at least I hope we are.
Proving we were here.
Yes.
They're auditing these workshops.
Just kidding. This is for, we can put this up into a YouTube channel that Bob just created, so that people who cannot attend these workshops still get to get a little, info about what went on.
So it's video as well as audio?
Yes, it's, Bob, can you tell about YouTube Air?
So it's capturing and streaming right now, and then once it's done, it automatically dumps into our channel, so people who didn't get a chance to see it or wanted to be here can go and view it that way. Of course, it doesn't have the active learning aspect or the peer-to-peer sharing aspect or that sort of thing. So much better to be here in person. But if you can't make it, that's an option for you. And we're kind of piloting this, so we don't know how it's going to go.
I'm Sean Mattingly. I'm a professor in the College of Business and Economics.
Kathy Gajan with the eCampus Center.
I'm Amanda Hicks. I'm the director of the Speech and Debate team, and I'm from the Comm Department.
Carol Schroeder, adjunct in History Department.
Awesome. Nice to meet all of you. So I'm going to just let you know what are the objectives of this workshop. Basically, you're going to learn how to compare your authentic assessment to traditional assessments that you might have been doing for a long time in your classrooms. We're also going to identify some ways in which authentic assessment has been used to measure student learning, mainly learning outcomes in your courses. And then we're going to come up with some ideas on how you can use authentic assessment in your specific discipline. We do have a little bit of hands-on activity at the end where you're going to work as a group and work on your own learning outcome and then share it with them. Okay, so a question is, and this is just something which you can first think in your own mind, and then you can talk with your neighbor, and then we are going to share it as a group. So what I want you to think about is, what do you or how do you currently measure student learning in your courses? What do you do to measure student learning? Think about it in your own mind first, and then pair up with a partner and discuss. Yeah, so you can be three people.
Who wants to go first?
I'll just
Not me.
focus on
Do you want to go or I can go?
Why don't you go? 'Cause
Okay.
I don't instruct.
So I
Oh,
guess I measure their
that makes it
learning
easy,
by-
right? I teach the business capstone course, and a third of the integration of stuff there, Because of that, I have really different levels of learning objectives. And the low-level learning objectives, I test through multiple choice exams because they're really low level. Just do you know these concepts? But most of the course is sort of higher learning objectives. Can you make recommendations for if this company should buy this other company and make an argument for why and how much economic value they create? So for those, a multiple choice exam, it's not going to work, right? So we use case assessments where they actually make recommendations and then present the recommendations to the class and make an argument for why.
I hate to make you
It's more
stop talking,
Case
but
presentation.
okay. Sorry, this is the worst part. I mean, this is the policing work that we have to do, and I just hate to do that. But can you share with the whole group what you have been discussing? How do you currently measure? Do you want to start?
Sorry.
Well,
That's
I
okay.
just, it
That's
depends if
right.
it's
That's right.
lower
30
division or upper division.
At lower division, I have short answer weekly to make sure they read the book in US history, which I'll be leaving 10 till to teach. Upper division, they write 3 papers. So,
Right, mine vary according to what I'm teaching. I teach public speaking, so in that case, I'm evaluating the demonstration of certain things, kind of a model of improvement from speech to speech.
Right,
Do
okay.
you have a baseline that you like, these are like skills, like people come in with varying skills, very comfort levels of being public speaking, so you measure them on their own individual improvement, or do you have a baseline?
I think that there is the basic standards or basic expectations that they have to meet.
Right.
So, and then how well they do that is kind of where that's built in on individual level. For instance, one student, the note they're gonna get from me when they have a very basic skill level is different than the note that someone else who has a more advanced
I
skill
see.
level is
So,
doing.
so somebody that was really comfortable speaking.
They both have to do 4 or 5 oral citations. Based on how this person can improve, they'll get the note on it. If they did the 5, based on how this person can improve, they'll get the note
How
on it.
big are your classes?
About 22 people for public speaking.
Could you do that with 200 people?
Could I, well, if
Could
I
you
had like,
assess
if I
something?
had learning,
Assistant.
teaching assistants, we could probably build something like that, sure. I mean, that's kind of, I'm always fascinated with evaluation because I have so much evaluation in the things that I teach, but I always have a model of improvement. Like, am I giving students feedback, not just, so this is the end of it, but then they can take that and apply it to the next, the next speech. And it's not easy, but it definitely is kind of follows the nature of what I'm teaching. Public speaking is an applied skill. So that's very different than, testing for, comprehension and things like that. So I have a different situation.
Yes.
I use a combination depending on the objective. So for really new material that they're not going to have expertise in, we use multiple choice exams, short answer questions, right? But a lot of my class it's a capstone class. So a lot of it's integration, higher order learning objectives. So we use a case study written, it's an exam, but it's a case study, you make recommendations. And there are 5 or 6 correct answers, but their arguments are really what we're looking for. And then we also use a presentation component at the end. But again, it's because it's a capstone.
what is a capstone?
It's the very last class they take where they try and put all the topics they learned together and do some big live case with a company.
I know you said you're from business. And
I'm from
economics, but
business.
I didn't catch the department, which caps.
I'm in management, so it's the capstone for all business majors that I teach though.
Oh, okay.
So they do like a live consulting for a company. It's the capstone for every business.
So even an
major.
accounting major has to take.
Every
this.
business major has to take my class, yeah. So it's kind of a weird class though.
No, but it's great that they have a live client to work with. That's authentic. That's what they would do in their jobs,
Yeah.
hopefully. All right, anybody else wants to?
We need to let Jim introduce himself and then he can give
Yes.
his.
You made it.
Sorry, but I work out at the prison and they don't always let me out on time. I teach in I'm Jim Williams. I teach in the foundations department at one of the 200 level classes. And I also teach in the dispute resolution department a workshop called Playing with Fire. And the workshop is pass fail, so there's not a whole lot to assess, and the program that it's based on is well studied and has a proven record that way. So basically, if they're there and participating, they get it for the most part. The foundations class, this is my 2nd semester, so I'm not real sure how exactly I do everything yet because I haven't got it all squared away yet. But last semester, I assessed based on a presentation that they did in the group and some reflections they did on activities and paper. But I didn't do any tests per se.
Okay, so now Maria is going to show you a very interesting video.
I found the coolest little video.
In the beginning, assessment was simple. We give something a try. It was obvious when we did not succeed. And it was obvious when we did. This became known as learning. Then formal education arrived. And we invented universities and lecture halls, lesson plans, and final exams. We tested students to see if they learned anything. And then we assessed our own effectiveness as teachers through anecdotal questionnaires and subjective end-of-semester surveys. And this might have been enough when we were graduating high school and college students to take predictable jobs with predictable career paths. But today, educators and students are part of a rapidly changing world. 21st century learners must be able to synthesize knowledge, communicate clearly with others, and create solutions to problems that we don't even know exist. Which means students need personalized, engaging, useful feedback on meaningful work. Not multiple choice exams and unexplained letter grades. So whether you're teaching accountants, engineers, artists, welders, scientists, or nurses, your students need detailed feedback on meaningful work so they can become learners, not simply graduates.
So it's totally an ad, of course. So buy Waypoint is what they want. But the other thing that we thought was really cool about that was it was a very neat way to kind of go through the history of education in a really speedy fashion and get us to a point where we're talking about education, we're talking about technology, we're talking about a global world, and you know, what are we putting out into the world? Well, you know, we're shaping these awesome little minds, and when we ship them off, you know, are they able to do things on their own? Are they able to succeed on their own based off of what we taught them? So it's a really cool way to look at it. The trick was, so now our question to you guys, and you can just spit out your answer to the group if you feel like sharing, what do you think authentic assessment is? And you can totally, you know, copy anything that we've talked about already. Like, what is authentic assessment?
I think it's really intuitive and being confident about seeing something and articulating what you see. So, I mean, you could have something like, you have to provide this thesis statement, and they either did or they didn't do it very well, or they didn't do it. But I think authentic assessment is putting it into a context where you explain why it's important, not just that it's missing, offering maybe even an example of how they could have done it, and then maybe even speculating on why they didn't do it. So that's why I say it's kind of intuitive. It's like sometimes if you don't have the confidence or you don't have the experience, you might not feel comfortable doing that. But sometimes it's just like, look, you know, maybe you're uncomfortable with public speaking and therefore you're not investing very much in it because you just want to get it over with.
So some depth into that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
I think that assessment should be about more than evaluating. I think when a student's done with any kind of assessment, they should know more than when they started the assessment. They should learn something by going through the assessment. I don't know if that is what makes it authentic to me, but.
I think we just saw said detailed feedback on meaningful work. So like if you get detailed feedback and you read it, you presumably learn from it.
Hopefully.
So then the assessment becomes kind of a learning experience. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yes.
Does anyone else want to share what they think? It's okay. There's lots of opportunities for me to pick on you. So what I put together from this was Authentic assessment is having a student show you what they learned versus having a student tell you what they learned. So hopefully a piece of each of what you guys contributed. But you know, you can take a multiple choice test and answer it, or maybe you do this awesome project that involves some real world experience that you then have a product. You have a project, you have a presentation, you have a proposal for this real world company perhaps. So having some actual, I don't know, depth in that learning is really where you get to the authentic piece of the assessment. And it doesn't even have to be anything traditional when you start looking at it in this wider view. Do we all feel good? Any comments, concerns, questions? All right, we're gonna move on to the next slide.
So how many of you are familiar with Bloom's taxonomy? Should be fairly, even if you haven't seen it like this, whatever, you should have probably heard this before. So when we're testing with a Scantron or with multiple choice, oops, I touched the screen, sorry. We're down here. What we want to do is kind of go up here to get more authentic. So you want to synthesize, you want to see how they're going to apply it, how they're going to evaluate what you're asking them to look at. What is their opinion? How does it work? How does it not work? That sort of thing. So any questions on this?
Not a question, but this is what they emphasize in the learning objectives workshop.
Right, right. So and this is, most people, whenever you're in faculty development, this is a very famous model that most of us follow. And so that's why we brought this up here. But there are other models that you can go to as well that are basically saying the same thing. So what I'd like you to do now is kind of consider what this is and what the different descriptions for the different levels are, and think to yourself what your objectives are in your class and how you can maybe move from here, or even from middle, higher. I'm not asking you to get up to the top, but maybe move up one step. So go back with your partners again, and think of an objective in your class, and then see how you say, well, I usually test like this, and it works, but I'm wondering what the next step would look like. Even if you're not going to do it in the class, what would it look like? How could you do that? So go ahead and take a minute to have a discussion with your partners, and we'll come back around and we'll share.
You want to go first? Since I
Sure.
dominated last time.
Yeah. What I'm doing for assessments this semester is I'm having them produce a presentation about it. In fact, they're teaching a day of the class. And I guess that gets up into at least the evaluation, if not the creativity, because
I think
if they
that-
do
I think that
anywhere
even though it
close
might
to a
not
decent
end up
job,
like that, I think
they'll
that-
be creating something new based on things that they've read and things that we've talked about.
Right, yeah.
So,
And
and
they're
then the other class that I
investigating
teach,
and
the workshop,
reporting.
it's
Sure,
all
with
about,
less burden.
there's
I
a
mean,
little bit
some- I
about
think
learning
some
concepts and learning
considerations have less
skills,
burden
but then
on
there's
the way
a
up,
huge component
and
of
you
that
just-
that
you
it's
kind of
actually
bring
applying.
down
So
and
we
just work at a very
do
basic level.
some role plays and some other exercises that are very similar to role plays, so they get to practice the skills that we taught them. And the learning is all by doing. They're engaging in a communication activity that they learn from as they're doing it.
Yeah, and in my other classes, I think that.
One thing I tried
Same
once to try and take
sequences,
presentation to the next level. I don't know how well it worked, but I'll keep toying with
The
it.
apply and analyze.
Is I gave the presentation group their normal present, make recommendations, argue why this company should do A, B, or C. And then I assigned another group, and I said, you are also gonna sit in the front, and you're gonna refute everything they say and tell us why they're wrong. And
Did
then-
the first group, no?
And then, no.
The second group's, yeah.
And then the first group had to sort of defend and support. It was pretty good, though. I think they sort of learned that, see the costs and benefits.
Yeah, I have much more demonstration.
I don't know, it sort of depends on the students, but
Right.
it was sort of a Hail Mary, let's just try it and see how it goes.
Yeah.
So would you do it again?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
really an opportunity.
I'll keep trying it. It's hard to
Yeah.
get the students ready for the,
So in that
be
you
the
mentioned
devil's
before,
advocate
checking
part, though.
understanding by the demonstration,
And some
but in
shy
your
students
public
don't really,
speak,
I really want them to get, not
class,
be
do you
mean, but
have
say you're
occasions where
wrong
students
because
can
of that,
be
you're wrong,
evaluated
and then
or
they come
analyzed,
back and
Explain.
problem.
When they do it, it's amazing.
Come up with a
It's just
response.
personalities.
Well,
Yeah, and that's
Well,
just
sure,
a lot
because
of,
it's not just
Which is something to work with too. If you're gonna sit out in the real world, they're gonna have to deal with
Yes,
different
so that,
personalities.
it counts, you're
Maybe
reaching
make a
actually
game
high
because,
levels, and if they have a solution to a problem,
Yeah,
that's
I tell you what though, it was
and
fun.
that's innovative.
Mhm.
They have a
It's
solution,
fun.
we look at it.
I don't know if that's
Well, I
good,
think
but it
it's
was
on a
fun.
couple of
Well,
them,
if
they're
you
grading
learn from
speech.
We're gonna share it.
Even if they don't have,
so.
How much time do I
nothing wrong
have?
with
if they
having
don't
fun.
identify a problem and create advocacy, there's some creating speech.
I'm sure
there's some
some
creating
students face it.
Right.
Yeah, I haven't taught at university,
So-
so in the corporate,
No,
and
they
private
don't.
sector,
I do
done
approve
a fair amount of training.
Yeah, right. You don't want some of the hot buttons.
So we got to share within our groups, but let's now kind of share what you guys came up with, some ideas, and we'll have this group share as well. So any ideas of how to move from here to the higher level? And I know Jim was talking about, he already has some of his students working up here already. So how, we were talking about what he does and how he works it. So why don't I pick on you and have you
Which
go
one?
first.
In my foundations class, I'm having my students teach the class. Their next assignment is to take a section or a problem they've identified from the book that we're reading and teach the class. So they're gonna have to do some of the creativity and a lot of the evaluation of the idea that they've identified in order to do an effective job. Then the other class I teach, the workshop, it's built in that that they create, they actually do the skills that we're trying to teach and evaluate themselves as it goes on. There's a built-in feedback session with each part of the class. So.
Carol, I'll pick on you next.
I was just saying in my lower division that has the weekly reading quizzes, they do have a final exam, but they have the 10 questions ahead of time. They have it right in the syllabus, so they have it the whole semester. And so in essence, they're writing 10 mini papers, but then I just draw 2 numbers and they write their final on 1. And so that's when they get up into the apply, analyze, and evaluate. And they're writing in their blue books. And then my film classes, my upper division film classes, they're too, they evaluate too, because they're comparing and contrasting the films and how it fits with the theme that I have put for the 4 films. And they're good. The upper division really have been high quality students. My lower division are hit and miss. So.
Anybody else want to share?
Well, I think that there is a lot of the create level in putting together a speech. So there's that, and then some of my other classes, I have students doing original research, so that would be authoring. So yeah.
What do they do their speech on? I'm just curious.
Well, it depends on the purpose of the occasion. So that's kind of the first thing they learn is they have to make certain decisions based on the objectives of the occasion. So if they were doing a persuasive speech, they would have the burden of demonstrating significance or a problem and providing advocacy or a solution to solve that problem. And that's usually through like the stock issues format of identifying the causes of the problem. And sometimes if you're familiar with like a visualization model or a motivated sequence, Monroe's motivated sequence is another way that they build persuasive messages. So they just, they propose a topic, mostly so we don't have 2 people doing the same topic, but also so that I can give them feedback on a better way to narrow it. But they propose a topic for an informative speech, for a persuasive speech, for a special occasion speech, then they do impromptu speeches, which is kind of like inspirational and motivational.
Thank you. Do you want to share, either one of you, what you're doing?
I think a lot of, even when my intent with having them write a paper or presentation is to get to the analyze, evaluate, create, I think a lot of them end up being just understand. They just explain what they know, right? That's not the goal, but that's what they do. So one of the things I talk about is to try and prevent that from happening is sometimes I've tried, I mentioned to them, have one group present, and tell another group, okay, you're going to disagree with everything they say and tell us why they're wrong in front of the whole class, just to try and force them to come up with, use evidence, make arguments, just to move up a little. Because even though the whole goal is to get them there in the first place, they usually end up with the explain ideas and concepts, just regurgitating what the text says shorter.
So I remember when I was in the capstone class for psychology department here, it was where I got my bachelor's degree. It was something very similar. We were put in pairs, and we had to come up with a presentation, each of us, to talk about some issue that was debatable in psychology. And so we both had created, but we had to work together on creating a way to be prepared for what each other was going to say. So the whole thing was sort of staged out. It wasn't really impromptu, but we knew what our arguments and discussions were going to be. But I mean, I'm looking at this and feeling like we created something and we were at the evaluative phase because we were justifying a stance, especially because we were asked questions by people in the class that we hadn't yet thought of an answer to. So we had to have enough knowledge to be able to do that.
See, and I've toyed with prepping both groups. I don't know. I only prep the group that's presenting, and the other group they don't even know until they get there that day. They all have to do it once, but it's a surprise that you're the antagonist for the day.
So what's common and what we're all talking about is no one's talking about for authentic assessment the lower part of this model. We're not talking about multiple choice. We're not talking about necessarily remembering specific dates and regurgitating information. We're talking about taking that information and applying it, thinking about it. How does it apply to the situation that you're assigning them to? Maybe even going higher and creating or looking into creating solutions or addressing a problem. So that's kind of what authentic assessment is all about. So with that, we'll let Dave take over.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Dave.
So sometimes the that's right.
Perfection.
So sometimes the way conversation goes, it's hard. Now, what we're discussing on this particular site is what are the limitations of traditional assessment. We've already been talking about some of the limitations of traditional assessment in the context of the conversation we just had by you guys identifying what components of authentic assessment would be. But just coming back to that, if you're just going to list off some things that you think are true, are limitations of traditional assessment, basically what we just saw in the animation there, the true, false, multiple choice, thinking in terms of traditional assessment, what would those limitations be?
If you want to just shout them out, that's totally fine. If you want to talk
Oh
about
yeah, I
it.
said think pair share. I just do things my
But
own
yeah.
way. Sorry.
I think they're limited in their ability to assess, and again, I think assessment should teach something. So I'm going to say assess and teach communication skills. And at least MBA and business recruiters, they consistently rank communication as the #1 skill they're looking for.
So to paraphrase, if people are taking these traditional assessments, they may be answering those baseline Blues taxonomy things with knowledge, but they're not learning how to communicate their knowledge.
Yeah, and you can be the smartest person in the room, but I'd rather have the second smartest that can speak well.
Yeah. Any other ideas how traditional assessment might be limiting or have some limitations?
Well, just rote memorizing is not that great a skill in life. And when I taught in China, they would always say, "What do you want me to memorize for today?" And I'd say nothing. I mean, it's just, but that is a very rigid way to have rote memorizing. I know on the reading quizzes that I do give this semester in U.S. history, it's always what is one of the things you read about. Never any names, never any dates. And if they just can generally tell me what they remember, they get it right. So I just don't think that rote memorizing is good for creativity and higher functions beyond just that.
So traditional assessment may overemphasize the need for memorization.
And not so much in history, but in other disciplines. What they've learned to memorize changes.
Yeah.
So I was able to recall that and share that with you, maybe get a high grade, but in 6 months or a year, that population or that statistic will have changed.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, and maybe on the same note, most of the questions that I hope my students can answer when they leave don't have one answer.
Right, yeah.
There's 38 answers. And what I'm really looking for is, can you make a case
Right.
for why resources should be put towards your answer? And you can't do that with a multiple choice exam.
Yeah, I don't think you can defend or critique if there's only one answer. Because then the only one answer is that I'm right. Or
So,
the only defense.
so traditional assessment doesn't necessarily address one of the goals we have in higher education is to teach people to argue. I mean, bad arguing, but I mean, make arguments.
Right.
Because the questions that the industry of the United States now need to address are not single answer questions.
The world is changing.
Yeah,
Single answer question jobs are being outsourced.
Computerized.
right.
Yeah,
Robotic or outsourced, and so the needs for today's graduates going into industry need to go beyond. What if somebody was to go through 4 years of education and only did traditional assessment and only answer questions that were related to basic memorization and understanding, they would arguably not have the skills to go to the workforce.
they might look like that ridiculous cartoon.
All right.
So these are the answers that are listed on here. Doesn't mean they're all the right answers, but these were some of the ones we came up with to compare. So there's limited response options with traditional assessments, especially when you force people to multiple choice. You don't get the chance to argue perspectives or things like that. Often hits only the lower level Bloom's taxonomy, which we discussed. There's a lot more potential for gaming the system, cheating, cramming, doing well because you're good at taking tests or good at more resourceful.
Yes.
So that is another disadvantage. And then it may be an unreliable measure of knowledge based on mitigating factors. And maybe knowledge isn't even what the word right here. It may be an unreliable measure of like potential for success with what you're learning based on. So somebody may have a whole, like you said, the smartest person in terms of who memorized the most stuff may not be the most productive person in the job where they have all the terminology.
Yes, so we'll move on. We've moved on. So we discussed a lot about authentic assessment. We discussed traditional assessment. So what do you think is the basic difference between these two in terms of what they are and what they can do for students, how your teaching changes when you compare these two types of assessments?
I don't really think of traditional assessments as bad or worse. I just think of them as more appropriate for low-level learning objectives.
Yes.
And sometimes I have a low-level learning objective,
Which you have
but
to.
most of the time I don't.
Yeah, that is the key point, Sean, you mentioned was it depends on your learning objectives. So if your course is something which is very knowledge-based, which is lower level in Bloom's taxonomy, that is your goal, to teach students the basic foundations. For example, if you're in a physiology anatomy class and the student doesn't get which part of the body is what, that's knowledge and understanding, you can't go to more complicated materials.
Mhm.
So if your job in that class is to get your students to understand that, and that's what your learning objectives or outcomes are, then don't feel guilty that you have to push them beyond, because that's not what the class is aimed for. So if you look at some of our lower level classes like the UF 100 level classes, they're very interdisciplinary. They are supposed to make the student think in different tangents, and that's all right. It's critical thinking, it's communication. So even though the class is of a lower level, it is expecting the students to go beyond the text that they read and think in different lines. So not necessarily the level of the class determines whether you can use authentic assessment or not. What are your learning outcomes? It's totally all right if it's knowledge-based, don't sweat it. You don't have to make them create something, which is. Anything else? What did you note? Maybe in the type of teaching that you do when it comes to the different types of assessments? How different are you as a teacher? Say, you're doing a traditional type of thing, and then you decide today, okay, I'm gonna make them do something authentic. What is your preparation level, or how different of a teacher are you then that day?
I'm really heavy into preparation, both lower division and upper division. So
Okay.
I want to walk in not being nervous. I want to feel confident.
Right.
to go.
Yes.
Yes. So some of you might have heard about flipped learning, where you go to the classroom, your students are already prepped. As a homework, they might have some videos that they have watched or read some materials. And when they come to class, they solve problems, right? So as a teacher, you don't know what problems will come up. I mean, you can have a few problems that you can give them, but your students might bring up more. If it's a lab-based class, you don't know what might happen in the class. So the level of preparation for authentic assessment as a teacher is pretty high compared to it would be if it was just a traditional class. So yes, you have to think about many more things just to teach the class. Okay, so we'll go forward, and we found some differences. For example, traditional classes, if you're just using an essay or if you're using a multiple choice, then there is just an option to select a response. Whereas in an authentic class, the students have to perform a task. So that is many facets of learning that is being demonstrated. Traditional classes can be contrived, which is you can just depend on rote learning and come to class with a set lesson plan and just do that. Whereas in authentic classes, real things might happen and real problems might arise, and they need constant problem solving. Recall, recognition, we just talked a lot about it, and then whereas in authentic, there is a lot of application and construction of new things. Traditional classes teacher structured, easy to do. You can use the same lesson plan for years on and on. Whereas in an authentic class, things might change, like in a flipped class, where it depends on the flow the students take. So you have to change your flow according to student needs for the day and student level of preparation. So that's kind of very fluid. Indirect evidence, of course. So if it's in a traditional class, you have a test and the students get a grade. Whereas an authentic assessment, you get a direct knowledge of whether students really got to reach the learning outcome or not. There's no like two ways about it. So these are some little differences that we noticed. Is there anything else that you want to add to this now that you've seen the table? Okay, so we'll move forward. Sweet.
All right, we're talking lucky ducks. So this one we actually slapped a timer on, but talking more about ways that you already use authentic assessment in your class. So we've come up with some really good ways already that you guys have already discussed. But now that we've gone through a little bit more depth, the difference between traditional and authentic assessment, this might have brought more things to mind. What are some other small projects, big projects, medium projects that you guys have already done, maybe successfully, maybe not successfully, maybe we're working on it, in your classrooms that this is bringing to mind? And our idea with this is you'll get back with your little groups. We were thinking about 2 minutes and 30 seconds per person with a 2-person group. You guys might have to dish it up a little bit shorter with a 3-person, but of course we'll be flexible. But maybe think about, there's some other things that have come to mind now that we have discussed it a little bit further. I'll go ahead and press go, just because I went to trouble that again.
I'll go last this time. I've talked a lot.
Well,
Yeah, whatever you
I
want.
have something
Take as long as you
that
want.
I really like.
Well, I guess I'll
They're
go back to my experience in teaching effective business writing course for a major bank in the state. And the methods that I use, some of those would be your traditional, and in terms of understanding the concepts or the principles, the guidelines. But then also I use
Because when they're left.
many samples of your writing, or give them an assignment, right? looking at, would determine classification arrangement.
If the burden is to prove to your audience why they should care, then they're talking.
You folks have had some good examples that I'm gonna draw upon, but I can't offer anything original right now.
Collaborate on something during class time and then ask
Well,
questions and challenge each other.
I've been teaching at the college level, the foundations class. This is my second semester, the conflict resolution class. I've been doing that for 20 some years.
Because I was
And I've changed in the course of doing that. The workshop itself is more evolved than changed. And it's mostly because I find we learned how to relax into it and felt some confidence in what I was doing and how I was doing it and comfortable in accepting what came out of it for what it was. We teach people from illiterates to little kids on up to adults and now in a college class. So it's a wide range of audiences. In the foundations though, one of the things that I always enjoyed myself as a student was the engagement. The big lecture halls, I never understood that model of teaching. It just wasn't.
True, that is a long-standing.
It wasn't effective for me. I could read the book and nowadays you can watch a video or YouTube and learn just as much, just as fast. So why bother paying a fee and coming to school for that? So I've always thought of teaching and learning as more of doing. So I think I've kind of done that without even really thinking too much about it in my foundations class, because what I have them do is do. I gave one quiz last semester, but it was based on what they did, and I made it up the day after the last presentation based on what their presentations were. I don't even know if I'm going to do that this semester.
That's difficult.
Then the rest of what they were
In
evaluated
some
on
areas of
was,
scholarship more so than others, but we do
was
have
their
this
presentations and their contributions to the class in general.
communication
And
discipline, oral
foundations
communication
is
competency.
different than business.
not
I mean,
only
you've
are
got a
students learning
specific
it, they
goal
need to
that
be
you
able
want
to
your
explain
students
it.
to be able to
And
manage a
so
business or
it's, I think that's a
contribute to a
big challenge,
business.
and there's gonna be a workshop here in
I
April.
don't have that kind of specific goal. Mine's a really
Like, how do
general
you
goal. I
set
want my
up,
students to be better citizens.
How do you find time in a
And
class?
what
to
that
give
means to
students
you
the
and you is
opportunity
different than it is to me.
communicate
And
with
I can't
accuracy
give them that
what they're
definition.
learning,
I just
and to be
give them
evaluated in a
some-
productive way, rather than
I think some
nothing
ideas
that you're saying
and
is true or accurate or so.
I guess inspiration that
But-
it is
But just
their
like
world,
he said, he
they're
doesn't want the
responsible
smartest
for it.
person in the room, he wants the
I-
second smartest person.
So I don't know how to
in the room.
evaluate that.
And so people
Unless
really
we
do
come
need
back
to
in
learn how
20
to,
years.
okay, I understand this, now I
See
can
what
turn around and
happens.
explain it to you.
They can learn to speak.
Okay, anything else? I got a minute. Two quick things come to mind.
Well, but
In an
there's
entrepreneurship course,
a space outside
I
of that
want
where
students
they're
to
being able
recognize
You know,
and learn about problem solving, how to communicate, how to solve problems, generally because entrepreneurship is about solving some market problem. So I said, you need to identify any problem. It can be anything in the world, something that's annoying in your life, your personal life, maybe it's tying your shoes, anything that's annoying. And articulate a solution to it that's better than the more common broadly known solution, and detail the steps of the solution and explain the solution. And I made them post it on instructables.com. And I had the class, so they got three kinds of feedback. I gave them my feedback, but I also let the class rate each other. And then they got feedback from Instructables, because the public will go out. And I had one student get 14,000 comments before the semester was over on this. And they loved it because they got not just
From the class.
learning from me, but from the world.
A lot of likes there.
Likes, but other people said, well, you should change this step, and really think about this. Or they said, I don't understand what you're saying in step 2. And they realized, oh, I'm not really being clear. It was a communication
For me,
assignment.
that experience was like, wow.
That's great affirmation
It was
too,
kind of
in
fun.
terms
So
of
by having
people
those
are
people come back
interested.
Right.
What,
Yeah.
you know, we
Who and who, I maybe I don't know anything about.
conversation.
this thing,
And
One
same
was,
thing happened to me
and they
as,
did
like,
weird things like
last year in class
how to
as a PhD student,
attract deer when you're
I
hunting.
made a comment that just betrayed
Anyway,
enormous.
The point was just to do something
Yeah,
creative,
it was a really
communication,
enormous
solve
amount of
problems.
ignorance
It was
that
the
I
first
had
assignment in
in
our
this
first
session.
class,
I had
and
one
we
individual
did our
class,
things,
I had
but-
made the assumption that there had been a history of black
Very
slavery.
interesting.
Trying to think of something I haven't talked
And I
about
was
before.
talking about like. oh,
They had
black slavery,
a workshop, or actually they called it a conference. It was all online over at the
No idea.
Alumni Center yesterday about using analytics in education. And they had all different ways to find out if people or students were listening to what you had to say. And so they talked about using social media, Snapchat, Facebook, and having assignments that the students would, like yours, do something in the social media and then see what kind of feedback. And then whether it was from another classmate or whether it was from someone from out in society, address that concern in some way. And it was all done on, and then, but then of course the analytics is,
You might have found yourself.
you know, most people wouldn't know how to go to the back end of Facebook or where Facebook allows you to go to track that information. Some of it you have to pay to get, and some of it's free. Same thing with Snapchat.
Instructables will give any academic free use of Pro account, and every student got both positive and negative comments from the public, which was great, because they started to see I need to be more articulated for this.
Yeah. But Instructables is great because you're creating for the most part, whether it's a small invention
Wide
or
open,
device or
anything,
whatever.
it could be anything.
Right.
Yeah, and that's why I use it for an entrepreneurship class.
And then Dave's
Might-
gonna
I might borrow
put
And for
It
that
is free.
really
Is that
well.
.com
I don't
or-
think that's exactly
Yeah.
what they meant.
I use Instructables all the time when I don't know how to do something.
Right. There's a lot of cool stuff in that. That's true.
I'm a DIYer. It's cool stuff.
Yeah. And you can get their email, they'll email you stuff all day long.
We're
too.
wrapping up on this end. How are you guys doing?
We're good.
Awesome. All right. So is there anything we want to bring back to the group? Is there anything new that was revealed or that you'd love to share with your co-teachers here? We had a pretty good discussion about some things that don't work.
That's so useful.
Yeah.
It is.
It's probably more useful.
Well, I'll go ahead and share with what we were talking about here, that there was someone who, it's like they tried. They tried. And so in a particular class, they were having students come up and share opinion pieces, but there was no response, feedback, anything like that. So it was just student opinion, student opinion, student opinion. So you're able to just spout out whatever you want, correct or not correct, and then just move on. So that was like, oh, you know, but then we talked about a more authentic experience, which was the same model, but it left opportunity for response. So someone got to share their opinion, and then dissenting or correcting or argumentative or, you know, whatever, other people got to respond back, and then there was an opportunity to develop thought there. You know, you can say something horribly wrong and get corrected and learn. You can say something that's awesomely cool and maybe no one thought of that, and so then that generates a conversation. So it was a cool kind of, well, this is how it didn't work and this is how it could have worked sort of scenario that we were able to talk about. Does anyone else want to share anything? You don't have to, I won't twist your arm.
We're gonna put this guy in the spotlight today.
So I did this weird communication assignment for an entrepreneurship course and intro entrepreneurship. So I just wanted to think about, I have to articulate that a problem exists and that the current ways of solving that problem are not adequate, and here's a better method, because that's what entrepreneurship is. So I told them to think of a problem, and it could be anything, and I got wide variety of problems. Come up with a new solution and articulate in a step-by-step process how to implement your solution and post it on instructables.com. And then the way I graded it is I made a little rubric and I gave them sort of a scale grade. A third of the grade was for me, a third of the grade was the class rank ordered the solutions to problems. And then the rest I said, we're gonna wait and see how your comments are on Instructables. And they got positive comments, negative comments. Some said you really should think about changing step 2, or it's not clear what you're saying, that the public gave. And I had one student get over 14,000 comments by the end of the semester.
Wow.
So it was really, just from the world, right? So it was really kind of fun.
That's awesome. Awesome. All right. Well, if we're ready, we can move on to the next one. Oh, Forgot, you have to click off. There you go. So I think this is Mr. Bob.
Where am I here? Benefits in the class. Benefits of authentic assessment. Okay, so we've been talking about what we could do, what we are already doing. So when we talk about authentic assessment, we're looking to, just a little bit of review, get on the higher end of Bloom's taxonomy. So when we've talked about the disadvantages maybe of traditional assessment, so what are the advantages or benefits of authentic assessment?
Hopefully this will be really easy since we just covered it. What are some of these things that we thought about? And why do we like doing it the more authentic way?
Higher thinking skills.
It gets more engaging for the students, they're more interested. And then even, I think to build on that in terms of other, future learning.
I think it's more fair.
More fair.
There's a lot of students who are just not built to take multiple choice exams.
And I think some of the mitigating factors that we kind of talked about before, like accommodations in school, that's such a huge thing right now. And you know, someone who maybe isn't a great reader is a great speech giver. Or something like that, like maybe their weaknesses, which might impact them negatively in a traditionally taught class, could be something that they could, you flip to be a positive.
There is a more universal design aspect to it. But then also there's issues with that as well. That's not one of our topics later, is it?
It's more difficult.
It can be more difficult to find accommodation. But so how would you, let's take a little tangent here. What would you do to address that?
Depends on what needed to be accommodated. For example, I've had some DRC students that had, for example, I have rules about in presentations and these arguments, you can't have any materials, no cards, nothing. It's just you on stage, right? Let's have a discussion, but some I've made accommodations for that. It's tricky though, because some students don't want other students to know that they're allowed to have accommodations. And so I usually talk to the student beforehand and say, what are you okay with other people knowing? Because I'm fine with letting you have notes or something with you, or giving you extra time for your rebuttal. Or are you okay with the class? And I let them decide, but it's tough.
Can be.
It can be, but it can also be rewarding only for that student because of the universal design aspect. You're rewarding for your other students in your class as well. So, any other benefits we can think of for doing authentic assessment versus the more traditional or lower level assessment? So we have the more engaging, real world,
More fair.
higher level.
More fun.
More fun.
There's more investment with your students. So promote the deeper learning at a higher level.
Accountability is big.
Create more ownership. Removes the ability to cheat or crayon. Does it, I guess, remove or limits?
Probably limits is a better word for that.
They'll always figure it out.
You know the smarter mousetrap, right?
So it gives opportunity to solve real world problems. So we have real world problems at the university. I'm in the real world. We're all in the real world. But it shows the problems that are outside of the university to your students while they're still in the university. So that's a benefit for the students as well.
I think the feedback's better too. You get a multiple choice exam question wrong and you see, okay, the right answer was C. I may or may not know why A is wrong and C is right, but then when you do this, usually the feedback's
There's more of a hook for them to remember
yeah.
why their error occurred and how maybe to fix it.
I overthink multiple choice too. I can find something right in everyone, or something wrong in everyone. That's why I like short answer, right words.
You look at it this way.
Yeah, that's what we touched on, because learning happens when what students encounter matches already a schema that is in their head. Like they already have encountered before, and if you can put those two together, they're likely to remember that for a longer time, than if they just clicked on the right choice. So authentic assessment, they will remember if they were involved in a case study or if they went out to the community and solved a problem, they will remember how that connected with that class. Longer than, some of us that you mentioned, you don't remember what class it was, but you remember the material that you did for that class.
Right, I also learned a valuable lesson of just think a little bit before you
But I really like, go ahead.
Do you think it builds confidence?
I would say it does.
And that's a tricky area because some students may not like to expose themselves to real world problems, but when they sign up for the class, if you have it mentioned in the syllabus that this class involves you participating, this involves you speaking out in class or attending, a community partner or whatever. So it kind of goes both ways, but that's what they signed up.
And I think the research will show that, especially with units like service learning, they probably have research, in fact I know they did because I've read it, saying how it has increased confidence. It not only gives you skills, but that's in a way, we're talking about putting the students, they're in the university, out with businesses, out with nonprofits and so forth to solve problems. And I was going to say the Instructables is a great way to bring the community into the class. So, all right.
So we talked about the advantages of authentic assessments. Now we're going to talk about what some of the drawbacks of authentic assessment. So take some of those things that would bring benefits and see how could they be disadvantaged or what other disadvantages are there to authentic assessment. And this is supposed to be collect individual responses. So that,
Yeah, so just you can think in your own mind and then just speak out what you thought about. Yes.
Yeah.
Time.
Yes. It takes a long time in planning.
These are superficial, but I'm really. I get more complaints from students about the grades because they're more subjective.
Yes.
It takes me longer to set up, but also longer to grade.
Yes.
So-
Even if you have a rubric, they will come disputing the rubric.
All the time.
Yeah.
isn't that interesting though that one of the things you identify as an advantage is that it's more fair, but that the complaint you get is that it's not fair.
Yes.
Yeah. I have to spend time to persuade them of the evaluation,
Why they got
which is
But I
which
think,
is annoying.
but it is, but I think it's also because the students have more empowerment. They take more ownership of their grade, maybe. Maybe.
That's
Is
a,
it a stretch?
an optimistic way to look at it. I don't feel like most of the cases of that happening come from empowerment. I think it comes from entitlement.
Okay.
But I think there's something very much something that feeds entitlement in just learning facts, which is that all you have to do is this, and then you have mastery.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of supremacy in that. So I think they're all related, but I don't necessarily see as many cases coming.
Well, if they can make a case for it, then maybe there's something to it. Yeah.
There's a whole class topic right there. What's the difference between empowerment and entitlement?
I've had to start videotaping so that when they come and say, no, I didn't do that, I didn't do it. Well, let me show you.
Yeah, let's look at the tape.
Just to defend my grade.
Yeah, I mean, I've had this discussion with students before. It's like if you think something is an error, because those happen. You punch the wrong number in or something like that. But what I see so many people turning it into is an issue of power, which is like I don't have the right to question, or I always have the right to question. And there's some stuff that's like, of course you should send me an email if it says 87 on your paper and there's 77 on Blackboard.
Mm-hmm.
So there's funny dynamics going on there. The people who think they have the right to, challenge someone's or question someone's decision or challenge their authority when, some people wouldn't even see it as that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Right. So they should be empowered to go, no, that's clearly an error, not in my favor.
And I even actually am of the opinion that they'd always have the right to come and argue why I'm wrong in their grade. I just don't like it when they do.
Yes.
But I do think that is their right.
And it's
It's just-
also, it can be a learning opportunity.
But it's a time annoyance.
Right.
Time
And that gets to a big, the more of this kind of,
And it can be like an escalate, it can be
Yes.
confrontational, there's a lot of emotional labor involved with that.
Yes.
I like try and make myself do it like performance art, like, let's have fun with the fact that you're here griping about your grade, right? But then they think I'm laughing at them.
Only a little.
But there's gonna be some real, like, you know, escalated emotions and confrontational situations with that sort of stuff.
So are there any other drawbacks to authentic assessment that we want to throw out there? All right, we made a list.
so, they may be informal assessment, they're tough to create and grade. Just creating those can be a lot more challenging than creating multiple choice tests, especially if you've been doing your whole course based off multiple choice and then you have to switch over to a different way of doing it. It can be difficult to ensure test validity. What do I mean by that?
I think that's what we were talking about also with the grading, the difficult grading. And then also kind of what this comment is talking about, like we were doing authentic assessment, but I'm not sure what I learned, you know, like, so does your project actually tie back to the learning objectives of the course?
Or is the test like measuring what it is supposed to measure? Like we talked earlier about if our aim is to measure knowledge, then it is all right to have a multiple choice question which aims towards that. But if our goal is to measure application, then that is not a valid test. Multiple choice is not a valid test.
And what if we have a situation where we are asking somebody as part of our athletic assessment to create a presentation and take all the knowledge and information they synthesize and they get up in front of the group and they kind of bomb. So if they forgot some of the stuff they were supposed to mention and their grade based on a rubric or whatever's been designed for this goes down, but they really did have the knowledge and it had to do with the fact that they were nervous and
Yes.
they didn't do as well, then how valid is our grading and how valid was our use of authentic assessment?
I've had students break down and cry and walk off presenting and say, I can't do it. And then the assessment failed. They didn't fail, the assessment failed. And I
Because it's
just,
not measuring what it intends to measure.
yeah, and I just had to come up with something else to make up for it.
Right. Which
And which is
again
good.
puts another burden on you and
Yeah.
it becomes another disadvantage. It's not very, like you had to do this for, how big are your classes, your capstone
45.
classes? Right.
50.
So if you had that happen with 5 students in one class, you would be very busy coming up with alternative authentic assessments.
Yeah, and so you don't have the time, and then while it is a good thing to have different ways of measuring the same learning objective, what if your learning objective is to measure communication skills and the student fails to communicate in a room full of people when in a real life job that is what is needed? So what do you do then? That's always difficult.
Yeah, we prepare them to be that.
Yes, that is what you're here for.
See, then the assessment didn't fail, the student failed.
Yeah.
You can see that.
But it could be a premature assessment too, right? Like maybe we are asking people like would we want to take an intro level class, say Psych 101, that people are learning in a class full of 300 people. And we want to say, let's break this into classes of 35 people each and have them do presentations on different psychological perspectives.
Mhm.
And then we end up creating a whole bunch of failure because they didn't even have time to learn or do those first things on Bloom's taxonomy that they needed. I mean, as a psych major, I can tell you the psychology class in high school, the guy only talked about Sigmund Freud and nothing but Sigmund Freud. So when I got into Psych 101, it was all this new stuff that I had no idea about. If I'd been asked to present at a high level on it, I probably could have walked my way through it and done all right. That's another disadvantage. Someone like me may do a lot better in an authentic assessment situation than
Sure.
somebody who has a hard time making a presentation from the group. If that's what the authentic assessment is. Another, learners might not understand the purpose of the assessment. Maybe it becomes about, I have to make a speech, and they've even forgotten what it is. The speech is not there. There's a lot of other ways to do authentic assessment.
And I think that may contribute to some of the misunderstandings and issues in the UF program in general, not necessarily anybody's specific class, but the students don't understand why they're in the class to begin
Yes.
with. And so, I mean, I've taught 100, I know Devshikha has as well. We're constantly having to remind them, hey, this is what you're here for, this is what we're going to learn, this is the idea of the class, this is why the university wants you here, so forth and so on. And by the end, usually we're able to, have a few of them that weren't bought in at the beginning in the class. But ultimately, it was a tough sell because the university, and rightly so, is reevaluating that program. But there were some issues there with why are we here, what are we supposed to do? So the students didn't have a full understanding. So it's important to get that up front with your students, no matter what it is, whether it's a workshop or a class or whatever it might be.
So let's see, we talked about learners might not understand the purpose, the time, that's exactly what that's about, the time available to do that assessment. If you're teaching a large, once you get past 45, 50, this is going to become more and more difficult. There's some interesting software out there right now that's being created by artificial intelligence pioneers that are trying to create case study and different situations that can be delivered over computer and graded in like a big testing center. It's interesting stuff. I'm starting to see some presentations on this, but it's that would let that be delivered in about time. A lot of times there's just not time in class to do this.
Cengage for some textbooks offers, you can do unlimited, they have all these cases and students write them up, you can give it to 1,000 students, and we have AI that grades it all for you. And I've used it.
I was gonna say, how did you go?
I did not agree with their grading. It was better than I thought it was gonna be, but it still wasn't, I think, good enough.
What you were hoping.
But I have used it once, just I was curious.
Yeah, there's some interesting.
But maybe eventually.
Yeah.
And the
Of course, that's
scary
where the
thing,
computers take over, so.
yeah, too, on writing papers is there's so many online. I mean, I'm looking up a topic and here's a paper on this and here's a paper on that. They're either free or they buy them. So I always try to have my papers with topics that they can't just Google and download. 3 or 4 different movies and then bring this in and this in and this in. And so they have to at least
Try a little bit.
Yeah.
Do a good job slicing it.
Not that they can just hire somebody to just, here's what I need you to write, so you don't know that.
In the future.
Yeah, gosh.
So it can come with some drawbacks. So definitely something to keep in mind when you make your tough decisions.
The last one is just the size of the class and the scalability of assessment. So basically the same stuff.
All right, we're gonna move to the cool part. Hopefully wake you guys up a little bit. So that handout that you grabbed at the beginning, it's got a little chart on it, and that's pretty much it. And this is something you can absolutely discuss with your neighbor, but you do not have to. Now that we've thought about authentic assessment, we've listened to what other people are doing, come up with something that maybe you want to give a shot in your own class. So we have our kind of the breakdown on the handout. I think I gave myself one as a cheat sheet. And just fill it on out. I'll go ahead and run the timer because I put it in there. But we will be flexible. I think we're doing good on time, and I know a couple people wanted to leave early. But we'll aim for 5 minutes of filling out the form, then we'll bring it back to the group, and we can share with everybody.
Yeah, the form is just for your notes. We're not going to take it back or anything.
You can take it with you.
Yeah, that's for the notes.
We'll allow it.
Later discussion.
Maybe I won't.
Yeah, think about your class or any situation where you would like to apply authentic assessment and then start with the questions.
So not starting.
No.
I didn't know we got inspiring music with it.
I know. Well, I turned it down. It was not that inspiring. It was more like urgent. I felt anxious listening to it.
Hurry up, get it done.
Kind of like Jeopardy. I'll set a 5-minute timer on my phone.
Oh,
that's
So after you have collected your thoughts, feel free to talk with your neighbor or one of the instructional designers we have here. You can ask us questions if you feel that you want to use authentic assessment, a particular topic in your class, but you don't know where to start. We can brainstorm with you. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Do you have a 3 o'clock class too?
Yeah, well,
Mine is just one floor down, so I'm good at that.
So we have evaluation forms here, but we'll also be emailing them to you as well.
okay, yeah, I have one, so I'll get it.
You can email the same thing.
So you can fill it out here, or you can email it back to us.
I'll email it to you. Want to share any, Jim? Is it Jim?
Mhm.
No?
No.
Nothing to share? Is that what the question was?
Yeah. I just,
You got a lot on yours.
it's kind of complicated.
Could you explain?
Yeah, so I want the students to be able to tell a client, you should or you should not buy this business. Whether that client's a hedge fund or that client's Microsoft trying to decide if they should buy some little startup in Idaho, you know. And so that's kind of a hard thing to say, assess, are you capable of explaining to them why you can or cannot. So I did like this break into the components of that task, that learning outcome. And so this part I'm good, break it up, and then how would I teach them the various parts. But for how to assess it, all I have is these question mark, question mark, question mark. Would I have them
Written, oral, or what's the other one there?
for, against?
But do you have a rubric when you maybe like it's a situation where they sit with a client, student A, and then you observe them, or maybe they have a peer observing them, and the whole discussion can you evaluate using a rubric?
Yeah, and that's kind of what I do is have a rubric, but it's just tough because it's so much work to do this.
Yeah.
That it has to be 4 or 5 students. And it's so easy for 3 of them to have no idea what's going on right on the
And the
hotel
two
for 2
guys
others.
who
But
have worked, yeah.
Yes.
I don't know, so that's what I do, right? Do an oral presentation, maybe for, against, argue. I have a rubric, I just subjectively assess my opinion, but I think it's the same
When
thing
I was
better.
in my business capstone course, we had that issue where we were in groups. And Devshikha, I think.
Sagir.
Yes. And we, of course, I was in a group where I had these 2 fellows who weren't doing anything, and I wrote a 60-page paper. So that was great. But so we brought it to him, and it wasn't just us. You know, we're at the end of our degree, we've been dealing with these group projects all the whole time, like, what do we do? And he said, you know what, that's life. You were gonna go out into the world and you were gonna get a job where you're in a group where someone's not gonna be helping. And it was unfortunate, that was not the answer that we wanted to hear. But at the same time, it was a big eye opener on like, oh yeah. And then there was an opportunity to kind of assess our classmates and how they helped the project, which was nice. But also the reality check.
What are you trying to tell me about?
They never did anything, no. But that was really like, oh, okay, yes, in real life, sometimes people don't.
And to Maria's credit, she did do the slides and a lot of other things.
Did
True.
this? I actually really like doing
I give you,
that.
remind me which two slides I do.
Yeah, so share Jim and Devshikha, but in the UF 100 class, that was a big complaint too. We don't want to do teamwork. I mean, they already know as freshmen from high schools and from doing it in K through 12 that teamwork means someone will do most of the work, and whether you like it or not, and there may be two leader types. They have to fight it out to see who. And then one, well, I don't like where it's going, so they just shut down. That happens often. So, and it is a hard thing. And I would give the speech of, that's what it's like out there. So step up, because you're going to have a rubric grading each other on how you did, and the instructor will be able to fish out who did the work.
Yeah, provided they don't cover for each other too much. But you're not going to cover for somebody who's a total slouch.
Right.
You'll never show that. Yeah.
So, even though I'm struggling with that part, I did actually get an idea for
Oh, good.
an assignment or something out of this. So
That's helpful. Good.
Okay, so, Carol, you have a class that you want to do. Okay, thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you. And enjoy.
I
Yes,
got
for
one.
keeping time. Well, we can just move forward.
It's just that time of day.
We have some resources available where that we pulled our information off of. Pretty straightforward, and then opportunity for questions or comments or anything that you guys want to share with us.
You know what would be cool? As a parting thought as I get up and leave. If I could see any weird, unique things other professors did. Not the details, because I don't know about French and art, but
So
You
in a
have
month,
something.
Leslie.
like some kind of knowledge base for,
Yeah.
do you do anything weird that works?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wait,
we have
that's actually
something.
a way.
That's the next one.
Leslie Brooks is my boss, the director of the Idea Shop, and I are doing a presentation in March, and what we decided to do, because we realized we had two different presentations, like intro to authentic assessment. I was on both of them. So I stayed on this one, and then Leslie and I decided to do a panel discussion of professors. We've already had, what was it, 40 some that have
40
identified,
people in
So-
BSU, more than 40 people in BSU who do
who
authentic
identify
assessments.
themselves as doing authentic assessments. So I'm gonna send out a survey to everyone to include the question, would you like to participate in our panel discussion? Hoping to get 4 or 5 at least in.
I just want to
So
read
that's
the
going to
list.
be- You just want to read the list, you don't want to. But don't you want to be able to ask questions about it?
It's gonna be a panel.
No, I just
discussion.
want, I'm sure others do.
Okay, well, we'll just.
I
make
really
you a
just
list.
would love a list that I can just, and then if I have a question, I can
Things.
email Dr. So-and-so, because I see they're the one who does it.
We'll make sure that's part of what we.
You know,
we're gonna do
because-
there,
If I was on the list, I would be happy to talk to people.
Who want to try to do something.
Yeah, but-
It's good to share the experience.
I
like
call
said.
up Columbia and NYU all the time and say, hey, I noticed this on your syllabus. And they say, I'll send you my assessment, this is what I do. And they give it to me from other universities.
That's a great idea.
I'm sure they will hear.
So that also ties in with OER maybe, to get them to use the common Creative Commons licensing to share, because that's one of the biggest questions in the open educational resources is, we know we can get textbooks, we know we can get documents from the government, where do we get tests, where do we get assessment information from? That might be,
I don't know what the rules, because I've called up professors at other universities and
yeah.
I
You
just
should
ask them
be on my.
and they just send it to me.
You want to be on the panel? It's March
Uh-oh.
3rd.
No,
The sixth.
What?
I'm doing something on March 3rd.
Oh, whatever time it is.
Well, good, 'cause it was actually March 4th.
started saying that before they shared the date.
Well, thank you for coming.
No, thank you so much.
Thank you for your input.
Well, if you get a chance, fill out the eval and.
We'll email you a Google form.
I will
with
fill out the
it,
eval,
And then you can fill that in.
for sure.
That's actually better for us.
Did y'all notice?
You didn't know
I
this?
did, I wasn't sure what it was.
This is a progression bar.
We're just
Oh.
starting, we're halfway through, we're done.
It's a sneaky snail.
That's pretty cool.
Well, thank you.
Have a
for
good day.
coming.
Thank you for coming.
Sorry to go early.
Thanks.
So all the resources that you had listed, are they,
I imagine we can email them to them.
Yes,
That'd be great.
that'd be great.
All right.
Cool, thank you guys.
Thank you.
We appreciate the attendance. Good questions.
It was March 7th.
Oh, you got the honesty.
Hey, if you can say a no before you do the day.
Quit signing me up for things, Dave. There we go. All right, back to a normal volume. I'm turning it up.